Most men misunderstand withdrawal because they confuse it with weakness, avoidance, or emotional defeat. Carl Jung saw it very differently. To Jung, withdrawal was not retreat. It was a redirection of psychic energy. And that distinction matters more than most men realize. When a man withdraws consciously, something subtle but profound occurs. The world around him does not simply lose access to his attention, it loses access to the emotional labor he was unconsciously providing. Conversations feel colder, relationships feel unstable, expectations begin to collapse, not because he became cruel, but because he stopped compensating for what others refused to carry themselves. Jung understood that most men are taught very early to externalize their inner life. They project meaning, purpose, validation, and emotional grounding onto women, institutions, work, or approval systems. Over time, this projection becomes a dependency. The man no longer experiences his inner world directly. He experiences it through reaction, through response, through whether he is wanted, needed, or affirmed. Withdrawal interrupts this loop. When a man stops reacting, people feel it before they can explain it. The phone calls become awkward. The tests escalate. The emotional atmosphere shifts. Jung would say this is because libido, psychic energy, has been pulled back from the object and returned to the subject, and systems that were stabilized by that energy begin to destabilize. This is where most men panic. They mistake the discomfort they feel during withdrawal as proof that something is wrong. Jung would argue the opposite. Discomfort is evidence that the psyche is reorganizing itself, that projections are collapsing, that illusions are losing their grip. The average man never stays here long enough to understand what is happening. He rushes to restore equilibrium. He explains himself, he reassures, he re-enters the old dynamic to stop the tension. And in doing so, he forfeits the transformation. Jung warned that whatever you do not confront within yourself will appear outside of you as fate. When a man refuses to withdraw, refuses to sit alone with his own psyche, he condemns himself to repeat the same emotional patterns through different people, different relationships, different environments. The faces change, the outcomes don't. Withdrawal is not silence for the sake of punishment. It is silence for the sake of truth. It exposes where your energy was being siphoned. It reveals who depended on your presence to avoid facing themselves. And most uncomfortably, it shows you how much of your identity was constructed through response rather than authorship. This is why withdrawal feels dangerous. You are no longer mirrored. You are no longer reflected back to yourself through someone else's desire, approval, or resistance. Jung called this the confrontation with the self, and he was clear about one thing: very few men survive it without trying to escape. But when a man remains withdrawn long enough, something irreversible begins to happen. He stops seeking emotional permission to exist. His attention becomes selective. His presence becomes heavier, not louder. People sense it, even if they can't articulate it. They feel less in control around him, because control requires predictability, and withdrawal destroys predictability at its root. When a man withdraws, what unsettles people is not the absence itself, but the sudden loss of access. Jung understood that most relationships are not sustained by love or loyalty alone, but by unconscious agreements. Emotional roles are assigned quietly. One person stabilizes, the other reacts. One absorbs tension, the other discharges it. When a man withdraws, he breaks this agreement without announcing it, and that is why the reaction is so visceral. People begin to feel exposed. They are forced to carry emotions they had outsourced. They no longer have a predictable surface to project onto. Jung described projection as the psyche's most efficient defense mechanism. We place what we cannot tolerate in ourselves onto others and interact with it safely from a distance. The withdrawn man removes himself as a screen. And when the screen disappears, the image collapses inward. This is why withdrawal is often met with confusion, irritation, or subtle hostility rather than understanding. It threatens the psychological economy of the relationship. The man is no longer playing the role that made others comfortable. He is no longer absorbing anxiety, soothing insecurity, or translating emotional chaos into coherence. And when that stabilizing function vanishes, people don't feel abandoned. They feel destabilized. Jung would say this is the moment when the shadow emerges. Not the man's shadow, but theirs. The irritation they feel is rarely about him. It is about what his absence forces them to confront. Their dependency, their entitlement, their unexamined need for reassurance. His withdrawal becomes a mirror they did not consent to look into. For the man himself, this stage is dangerous in a different way. Withdrawal creates silence, and silence amplifies whatever has been avoided. Old insecurities surface, questions about worth, relevance, and identity rise without distraction. Jung warned that withdrawal without inner work becomes isolation, and isolation without meaning leads to regression. This is where many men fail. They mistake withdrawal as an end state rather than a passage, but when the man stays conscious, something shifts. He begins to notice how often his presence was used as emotional currency, how attention was traded for approval, how effort was mistaken for value. These realizations are uncomfortable because they dismantle the moral narratives men tell themselves about love, sacrifice, and loyalty. Jung was unsentimental about this. He believed maturity required the death of comforting illusions. As withdrawal continues, the man's psychic energy begins to reorganize. Libido returns inward, creativity increases, focus sharpens. Not because life becomes easier, but because his energy is no longer fragmented across multiple external demands. He becomes less reactive, not through discipline, but through disinterest in unnecessary emotional labor. This is a crucial distinction. Power that comes from suppression is brittle. Power that comes from clarity is stable. Others begin to sense this change without understanding it. The man feels harder to read, less eager, less available for emotional negotiation. His presence, when it occurs, carries weight because it is no longer guaranteed. Jung noted that what is scarce acquires symbolic power, not because of manipulation, but because scarcity forces consciousness. People pay attention to what might disappear. This is often misinterpreted as arrogance. In reality, it is individuation in motion. The man is no longer defined by how well he fits into someone else's psychological needs. He is defining himself internally, and that reorients every dynamic around him. Carl Jung understood something that modern men are rarely taught. Psychological growth does not make you universally liked. It makes you distinct, and distinction always creates tension. When a man withdraws and continues inward rather than rushing back to restore comfort, he begins to separate himself from the collective emotional rhythm around him. This separation is not social first, it is psychological, and that is why it is felt so strongly. Jung called this process individuation, not improvement, not self-esteem. Individuation is the painful movement from being a function of the group to becoming a whole unto yourself. The individuated man no longer exists primarily to regulate the emotional states of others. He is no longer an extension of someone else's expectations. And because of this, he becomes difficult to categorize. People respond to this in predictable ways. Some feel drawn to him, sensing coherence, depth, and self-containment. Others feel threatened, irritated, or dismissed without being dismissed at all. Jung was clear that this reaction has nothing to do with morality. It has everything to do with projection. The withdrawing man becomes a blank surface again, but this time intentionally. And onto that surface, people project their own unresolved fears. This is why some people accuse the withdrawn man of being cold, arrogant, or detached. These accusations are rarely descriptions. They are confessions. They reveal the discomfort of interacting with someone who no longer over-explains, over-gives, or over-adjusts. Someone who does not rush to fill silence or manage tension deprives others of their usual emotional leverage. Jung warned that the individuated man inevitably disrupts unconscious hierarchies. In every group, there are unspoken roles: who reassures, who adapts, who absorbs, who leads emotionally. Withdrawal removes a man from his assigned role without asking permission, and when that happens, the group must reorganize itself. Some resent this, some adapt, some drift away. This is why withdrawal often leads to loss, not as punishment, but as consequence. Relationships that were sustained by projection rather than mutual wholeness cannot survive individuation. Jung believed this was necessary. What falls away was never aligned with the self to begin with. It was aligned with a persona, a role, a function. For the man himself, this stage brings a new temptation: to enjoy the reactions, to use withdrawal as a weapon. Jung would have warned against this. Manipulative withdrawal is still dependency. It is still defined by others. True withdrawal is quiet, unannounced, and uninterested in outcome. It is not performed. It is inhabited. As the man continues, something stabilizes internally. He no longer feels compelled to be understood. He no longer experiences disagreement as threat. His sense of self becomes less negotiable because it is no longer outsourced. Jung described this as the emergence of inner authority, not dominance over others, but alignment within oneself. This is the point where the man stops asking whether withdrawal is working. That question itself belongs to the old pattern. He no longer measures his behavior by reaction. He measures it by coherence, by whether his actions feel internally congruent rather than externally rewarded. And this is what truly changes everything. Because once a man reaches this stage, he is no longer withdrawing from others. He is standing with himself, and from that position, every interaction becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. The final resistance a man encounters when he withdraws is not social loss. It is existential fear. The fear that without constant engagement, without being needed, without being reacted to, he will become invisible, irrelevant, alone. Jung understood this fear intimately. He believed it was the last illusion guarding the threshold of individuation. Most men equate connection with existence. If they are not desired, consulted, needed, or pursued, they feel as though they are fading. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. From early life, men are trained to measure their worth through response, through usefulness, through impact on others. Withdrawal interrupts this measurement system entirely, and when the metrics disappear, the man is forced to answer a terrifying question: who am I when no one is pulling on me? Jung would say this is where the self finally has room to emerge. Loneliness during withdrawal is often misdiagnosed. It is not the absence of people that hurts, it is the absence of distraction. The psyche, no longer anesthetized by constant interaction, begins to speak clearly. Regrets surface. Unlived instincts demand attention. Suppressed desires knock without apology. Jung insisted that this confrontation was unavoidable for any man who wished to become whole. This is why so many men return prematurely. They confuse discomfort with danger. They rush back into noise, into relationships, into roles that dilute their awareness. And the cycle repeats. The same dynamics, the same frustrations, the same sense of quiet dissatisfaction that never fully leaves. But the man who stays withdrawn long enough experiences something unexpected. The fear of invisibility dissolves, not because attention returns, but because it stops being necessary. He realizes that relevance was never granted by others. It was postponed by dependence. His presence no longer seeks confirmation, it carries its own gravity. At this stage, people respond differently. Some feel drawn, sensing depth without being able to explain it. Others feel indifferent, which no longer threatens him. The man is no longer organizing his life around reaction. Jung believed this was the defining marker of psychological maturity, the ability to stand internally without collapsing outward. This does not make the man isolated, it makes his connections precise. He no longer overextends. He no longer performs emotional labor to be accepted. He chooses where his energy goes, and that choice alone transforms every interaction. Conversations become cleaner, boundaries become effortless, silence becomes communicative rather than awkward. When a man reaches this point, withdrawal is no longer something he does. It is something he has integrated. He can engage fully without losing himself. He can detach without hostility. He can walk away without resentment. Jung would say he has stopped living from the persona and begun living from the self. And this is why everything changes. Not because others suddenly behave better, not because life becomes easier, but because the man is no longer governed by unconscious need. He is no longer chasing equilibrium through others. He is standing in alignment with himself, and the world must now meet him there. If this resonated with you, it means you're already sensing the shift. Support the work by liking the video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing for deeper psychological breakdowns like this. The link in the description helps keep this channel alive. Withdrawal is not disappearance, it is emergence.